on a night like this as well. So thanks, everybody. It's great.
Well, good evening and welcome back. It's been a long wait, but we're back to meet the Mayor. It's the first one of 2021, the first one since we all had to stop doing everything fun and interesting for about a year and a half. But Andy, it's great to be with you this evening.
And you, Michael. Thanks for doing it.
For those who don't know, and I wouldn't expect you to, I'm the man from the radio. I'm the voice of XS Manchester's news bulletins, Michael Gaffney. We'll get the face for radio jokes out of the way right now, but I'll be hosting things this evening. I want to start, Andy, by jumping into a question that's particularly relevant given the visitor that Barry had today, not Burnley. It's about little towns, because there's a place just down the road from here called Radcliffe, which is getting £20 million, an enormous amount of money for any area, but particularly an area like that. And it got me thinking about those little towns we've got around Greater Manchester. It could be a Middleton, it could be a Hyde, it could be a Lee.
It could.
We've got a question here from Paul Heslop, specifically about Kersley, but really it applies to all those places. Paul, if you want to make yourself known.
Hi, Paul.
Greater Manchester have been left behind, and that's probably put it best mildly. In many cases, they've been stripped of their assets, the municipal buildings have gone, civic amenities have been taken away. So I could be from Staley Bridge, I could be from Tilsley, I'm from Kersley. And the question simply is, based on the fact that we are under the Metropolitan Borough system, I feel it's failed. I think it's failed the towns like Kersley. And if Kersley had a tier of local government below Greater Manchester Combined Authority, they may have more power and the ability to look after their own affairs. So the question is, I believe that the Metropolitan Borough system has failed towns like Kersley. Do you see an alternative tier to local government that could sit below the MCA? Thank you.
Well, it's an interesting question, because I was the MP for Lee for 16 years, so I know what you're talking about and what you mentioned, Michael. Yeah, 'cause if you go around the boroughs, you know, for Wigan there's a Lee, Bolton there's a Farnworth. You know, you can go through all the 10 boroughs, can't you? And you can see that pattern where the primary town perhaps has had more attention than the outlying ones. I mean, it is a reflection, I'm afraid, not of the structure so much as the funding. You know, councils haven't had enough to go to all of those towns in recent times. I mean, that is the reality of it. However, if I look back at what we did in Lee, we built the Lee Sports Village without any levelling up fund, you know, and that was Wigan Council going back 10 years or more ago. So, you know, it's tough because Lee was a mining town, and you take the mines away, as they did in the 80s, without any proper support, those towns are going to struggle. And I think it's true of all of the towns you reeled off there. They had industry that sort of left without that sort of funding to help them find their new path. And I don't think you could blame it all on the councils or the local government structure. If you were to create, I think you're saying sort of town-led councils, is that what you're describing?
Yes, sorry. I was thinking that the fact that the centralisation of the bigger towns, the dominant towns in the borough, that seems to be, they put the focus on the bigger towns. And quite often you'll have councillors who are more interested in that big town than the peripheral towns in the borough. So in the case of Bolton, I think it's a 50-50 split. 50 Bolton councillors from the town of Bolton, and the other 50% being from, say, Horwich, West Orton, Kersley, Farnworth. Yeah. So it's this dominance of the big town that's actually pulling in, and their rationale is success will emanate from the centre, and it's a bit of a cliche now. It's not. Success is not emanating from the centre, as we're all told.
Well, I do understand the point you're making, so I'm not going to deny it as a former MP for Lee. And I think that has been the pattern over the last 20 years. But certainly myself, I've got the leader of Bury Council here, Eamon, tonight. We've been talking about Radcliffe for a while, haven't we? Because we recognise this phenomenon, and the money that was given yesterday is basically backing the council's strategic regeneration plan. If you look at Farnworth, we've talked to Bolton Council in exactly the same way. Middleton, I've made a commitment there to have a mayoral development corporation if the council want it. So I think we are it's not just the 10 districts. If Greater Manchester on top of the 10, I think can start to put some heavy lifting behind what the councils are trying to do for their areas. And it's beginning to come through. I wouldn't say we are where we need to be, but you know, I think you will begin to see a change. I think that's certain. Because of some of the transport funding we got as well. You know, I've got projects all over the 10 districts that will benefit some of those smaller places that have been particularly forgotten from transport. And let's remember, that's often the first thing to go, isn't it? Lee had lost its train station in the 60s under the beaching cuts. And that then, I think, was the domino that knocked a lot of other dominoes over. And I think, you know, if you look around some of those towns, you know, which of these towns has the right level of transport connectivity at the moment at the right affordable cost? Well, none of them, I don't think. So when we kind of rethink transport, I think it will connect the smaller places to the bigger towns, to the city. I think that's got to be part of the answer, it seems to me. I understand the point you're making. I think to create a new layer at that level would just add costs on administration rather than on services. But obviously the way to do it is to help our councils have a plan for all of those outlying towns. And I think we can do something to help with that. I launched a town centre challenge when I became the mayor, and a number of the things that have come from that are now in development, you know, particularly around some of the towns that I've mentioned. So, yeah, I understand your point. I don't think it's about separating up the boroughs and breaking them up, but I do think you're right to say, well, where are the results for Kersley, for Farnworth, and all those other places? Because, yeah, they've had a tough 20 years or more. When it comes to the Towns Fund, this idea that these localities have to go to some official in Whitehall and make their case there, they're a long way away, removed. I mean, is that the right way of going about it? I noticed a tweet today from one of Bury's most famous sons, Gary Neville. And his take on this was, the government are trying to buy more favour in the north of England through announcing spot investments in small projects. This isn't levelling up, it's PR finance. Is he right? I think he's got a point, because if you look at the list of things that were funded yesterday, there's swimming pools in it, there's a zoo, I think, is in it. These are small projects, effectively, that are being decided hundreds of miles away. And the mayor in the northeast was saying they picked towns that they wouldn't prioritise, you know, some of the more affluent areas. So I would say these are localised investments that councils used to have the money to do themselves. They didn't need to go on bended knee to Whitehall to do them. But local government finance has been destroyed to such a point where they haven't got that funding to pay for those swimming pools and those things that are the basic fabric of communities. And they're now having to, you know, it's almost like, you know, the government sees the PR opportunity. Oh, we're in a budget going to announce some money for this place. And I think there is a big dollop of that in this, I do. You know, it wouldn't have happened when I was in government, definitely, because local government was better able to do more for itself at that point in time. We've seen a real change in the last 10 years, but, you know, much more kind of weaker local government and, you know, this tendency for the centre to think it can run everything.
While we're on the subject of money, let's move on to the NHS, because increasing reports that in Greater Manchester, as well as elsewhere, things are in an increasingly worrying state going into winter, and I'm sure many of you will have seen the MEN article from the last couple of days talking about ambulances literally piling up outside hospitals. This is a question from someone who couldn't be here physically or remotely this evening, asking specifically about how we reduce waiting times in the NHS in Greater Manchester. But I guess there's a bigger question there too, of just how do we get the NHS through the winter that's to come, because it's going to be grim.
You're right, there's a very big immediate question about the winter. I've been in a few hospitals recently, and the staff, they do feel totally dejected, if I'm honest. It's a tough thing to say, but that's the kind of feeling you pick up when you speak to them, because they had a lot of attention, the support, the clapping and everything last year. I think they feel now that they're just, you know, a new mountain has opened up in front of them, but that there's no sort of recognition of that. The world has moved on, and whereas they're still trapped in a very difficult reality in the NHS. So the winter will be tough, definitely, because it wasn't just COVID that was stopped in its tracks by the lockdown last year. Flu was suppressed. Norovirus, which always hits hospitals in the winter, was suppressed. So there's a lot coming straight back at the NHS with a vengeance, to be honest with you. And there's a worry about how it will get through this winter. But then beyond that, you're absolutely right. There's a waiting list mountain that's, you know, reared up in front of the NHS. And I bet everyone in this room knows somebody who's caught in this now. Certainly, you know, my mum is caught in it. You know, everyone will know somebody. It's not just orthopaedic operations either. It's mental health waiting lists. You know, the demand for mental health services has gone like this, and the system can't cope. So you're really right to raise this. Because of the higher cases that we had, and therefore higher numbers of hospitalisation that we had through the main part of the pandemic, our NHS was more disrupted than other parts of the country. So consequently, our recovery is going to be harder and longer. I know it's not a great thing to say on a wet night. I was going to say a wet night in Burnley, wet night in Bury. It's not a good, easy thing to say, but I say it because I think we've all got a job here, haven't we, to think about NHS staff over the winter and obviously use NHS services, you know, responsibly. I'm sure most people do, but you know, there's a real pressure there that has to be understood, I think. I mean, we are doing things, by the way. That's due probably.
Well, that was exactly what I was going to come on to, because of course, Greater Manchester controls its own health and social care. So, what's the plan?
Well, there actually is a really kind of interesting plan emerging, and I think we're moving, just as we're talking about turning to a new era with regard to the way, you know, we think about all of our towns, and you know, the NHS is starting to think now less about being a collection of individual trusts as they were encouraged to be, and thinking more about it as a system, which is what it should be. In my mind, the NHS should be about one system, so that the hospitals are now collaborating, and they're trying to set up diagnostic hubs. So I think there was some money given for this yesterday. There's going to be one in Oldham. I know it's not directly here, but it's not far away. There's going to be one in Bolton. We're looking at Trafford, and I think Oldham as well as what are going to be called cold or green sites, where they're going to do a lot more elective work. Wrightington, which is, I'm afraid, a bit of a trek away, but it's part of our system because it's linked to Wigan Hospital. They're going to set up an orthopaedic hub to try and get more operations through. So, you know, things are being done. The hospitals are all collaborating on this, but I wouldn't underestimate the scale of the challenge.
If we cast our minds back to when the Devo deal handed this power over, lots of goals were set in terms of what we're going to do on cancer outcomes, well, life expectancy generally. Where does that leave all that?
Well, like everything, it's been thrown off course. But if you look at some of the things we were doing before the pandemic, we had higher rates of people becoming physically active than anywhere in the country, and that was part of the population health focus that we had. Smoking cessation was increasing. We had a higher rate of improvement in social care. So we've now got hospitals actively supporting people in the care system. We set up a teaching care home project. We had, when devolution started, about 25 to 30 failing care homes, inadequate care homes, and that's down to below 5 now. So social care has been supported by a more integrated system. That has definitely happened. And in the height of the pandemic, I mean, Eamon will remember this last year, Deputy Mayor's just arrived at Bev as well. I mean, we were having one conversation with the whole of the system through the pandemic, and our hospitals helped social care with PPE. You know, that didn't happen anywhere else in the country. So there's been a lot done to sort of integrate our system, and I think it is in a better place than other parts of the country. But a lot of the good things we were doing about promoting health and preventative work obviously did get derailed by the pandemic.
On the subject of health and the pandemic now, we have got a question from one of our virtual attendees. So I want to bring in Phil Morris. Phil, you should be able to unmute yourself.
I've done that. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're live and clear, Phil. Hiya.
Hi.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, hi, Andy. How are you doing?
Yes, good, thanks. Great system, this, by the way. I can see
very
you
good.
and hear you loud and clear.
I've got a simple question. I was driving through Salford Quays at 6:30 on Monday night last week, the 18th, on the way to the Lowry, and a single Metrolink carriage crossed in front of me, so I had to stop. Obviously, I was driving, and I had a look in. It was a single carriage, standing room only. Around 2 to 3 people only had masks on, and the rest did not. And I'm just asking seriously, how dangerous is this if you can't enforce the COVID regulations that you introduced to Metrolink, where you've got such high case numbers and deaths increasing every day?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I mean, I don't think the requirement to wear face covering should ever have been removed from public transport. If you go to pretty much every other European country, they are still requiring it. And together with other mayors around the country, we discussed this when that Freedom Day event happened, and we all decided that we would try, and I emphasise try, to keep a requirement in place, because we knew it was going to be difficult. Metrolink is an open access system, Phil, so it's very difficult to police the behaviour of every person on every Metrolink tram. It's difficult from a revenue protection point of view, if I'm being honest. And it's an easy to use system, but therefore it's a hard system to enforce. It's not like the London Underground, where people have to go through a barrier, and there's London Underground staff watching over that barrier. Ours is a very different system. The levels of compliance were quite high through July and August, but I think people have got out of the habit of leaving the house with a mask, because of the reduction in the requirement on, everywhere, to be honest, and hence the levels have dropped and dropped. So there is still about a quarter of people on our latest figures wearing them, or a half at the early morning peak, but it drops down lower as the day goes on. As I say, we're not going to change our requirement that they should be worn, because we still think it's the right message going into the winter that I've just said to Michael, where we're going to have COVID, flu, and all those other seasonal bugs around. So, I mean, what we would like more than anything is a return to face coverings on all public transport. It's just sensible, given everything that's ahead of us. But I can only say to you, we've tried, but we're pleased to have the new chief constable with us tonight. His teams have been helping us. We've got obviously staff on the trams who remind people, but it is very, very difficult to maintain compliance on every tram, and we just simply don't have the staff to be on every single tram. I understand your frustration, by the way, but I'm just giving you the reality of the situation that we're in.
Can I just add, I got an email from the head of Metrolink this morning, and he said the police and Travel Safe have to enforce it.
Well, I mean, obviously, we'll keep a close watch on this as we go into the winter. We are watching the cases. So currently, if you look at the case rate in Greater Manchester today, it's between 400 and 500. It's about 450. I can't remember the exact number. Thankfully, the level of hospitalisation is much lower than it was this time last year, and has gone up a little bit actually in the last fortnight, but it's not anywhere near the levels it was last year. So the vaccination programme is working. Obviously, the booster programme is going to be critical, Michael. The level of take-up of the booster is about 44% at the moment. So 44% of people eligible have had it. So we do need to work hard to get that booster rate up. But all of this is going to need to be in play as we go through the winter. And can I just say to you directly, Michael, I am not ruling out going back to TFGM and Stephen and GMP and saying we're going to need a more strong enforcement effort around face coverings on transport. I've got to be careful, because we can't just misuse resources or put them to things when there's other higher priorities out there. But equally, we will do that if it's necessary.
When the national messaging is what it is, though, and people can watch the 10 o'clock news and see Prime Minister's questions, not many masks to be seen, certainly in some parts of the House of Commons.
I know.
Are you shouting into the wind here?
It makes it very, very difficult. But as I say, I'm not saying everywhere, but I think on enclosed public transport, it is the right thing to do. It's just a sensible thing to keep us all that bit safer. Because it's actually not just, as I say, COVID. We're all more at risk of flu this winter. We're all more at risk of those other seasonal things that are floating around. There's been a cold, hasn't there, a nasty cold bug going around. And we're all at risk of all of those things. So I think I've checked in with the other mayors as well. London Underground is in the same position. They've tried to keep a requirement in place, and it's dropping all of the while, but they're not going to remove it. So I don't think it's right for me to remove it. Just say, we give in. I'm not going to say that before this winter. But I know it's Ask Andy, but can I ask the audience, if you like who wants to be a millionaire sort of moment here? But what's your view, if you don't mind, just so I can kind of, number one, how many people would support the requirement to keep masks on public transport? Do most? Okay, well, it's fair enough. But so those who do, and those who don't, you sir, anyone else not support it?
Me, but can I qualify?
Let's get the mic to you.
Right, yeah.
There we go.
I think it's fine actually to make wearing masks compulsory on public transport, as long as it's not just public transport. Because what happens when you do that, it sends out a negative message that public transport is somehow unsafer than going into a restaurant, a pub, a cinema, whatever you like. But if we're going to have mask wearing in public places, let's not just isolate it to being public transport, please.
Okay, that's a very fair point, and you know, I understand that point. Supermarkets as well, and other things. Yeah.
Right.
Of course.
Yeah, let's bring the mic over to you, and then we'll bring in this gentleman over here. Sorry to get you running round, Rachel.
All I'm going to say really on the face coverings issue is that we didn't go to these lengths when you know, with flu over the years. We didn't wear face coverings for flu. So what's the difference between flu and COVID? I mean, I don't think face coverings are needed. I don't want to wear a face covering. I don't think I need to wear a face covering. We've never done so for flu. You know, when you look at back all the previous winters, NHS has always been the way it is. Ambulances queuing to get into hospitals, beds full. And we've never gone to these measures with restrictions. It's not needed.
Well, I think there is a difference at the moment. There won't be in time, will there? Because once, you know, we've got a treatment for it, that is a really effective treatment that people can, in the minute they get COVID, they could take something and it will deal with it, then you will have a point. But I think we're not in that position at the moment, are we? So therefore, we're in this kind of difficult and quite dangerous period with it. And that's the difference between COVID and flu. COVID will become like flu, I think, at some point in time, where all of our natural resistance to it increases, but our bodies have not yet built up that immune system yet, have they? You know, we're building it now through the vaccine and people who've had it, but we are more at risk from it. You know, this figure is correct, by the way, and if anyone, I have checked this with the government. This year, I said the hospitalisation rate has been lower, which it has because of the vaccination programme. But of the people who have died from COVID this year, between 98 and 99% have either had no or just one jab. You know, that is why it's a risk at this point in time. If people haven't had the vaccine, they are at risk. And, you know, well, we're all at risk to a degree. And it's the measures, I know, are annoying. No one wants them, but they're just about helping us through this. And the biggest argument I can put to you is this: if you don't like wearing a face covering, imagine if you're going for chemo at the Christie. Imagine getting on and you've no car and you've no people who can help you. Imagine going on a public transport and seeing, you know, you must feel, or imagine you've got like a, you know, immune condition. You'd feel really vulnerable, I would think. And so it's not about so much ourselves, and the government sometimes say it's a matter of individual choice. Well, I don't think it is. I think it's a matter of collective safety and actually looking out for the most vulnerable people amongst us who will feel, I think, really exposed by lack of face covering wearing on transport.
Before we move on from this topic, we've got two more people to bring in. We've got the gentleman. Is it a rugby league shirt you're in?
No, this is a infantry, military rugby shirt.
I was right with rugby, and there's a gentleman in the corner.
As an ex-employee of Metrolink,
Yep.
and as Andy mentioned, I back Andy up totally with the fact is, not even revenue protection, antisocial behaviour on there, the mask, just to get people to wear a mask, the staffing level, the amount of staff you would need to actually even do that. I mean, I'm triple jabbed and I still wear a mask when I'm going into Manchester from Bury. It's just silly, and I'm not going to point a finger, but it's the younger ones who just think, what the hell?
Yeah. It is tough, isn't it? And, you know, I think, you know, it's, in some ways, though, it's not their fault when the messages from the very top are, you know, please yourself, which is what the message was, wasn't it? You know, we go back to that Freedom Day. But thank you for everything you've done to support Metrolink. You will know, and we've got Bob Morris from TFGM here tonight, who often makes the point to me, you know, we have a tram system that has to pay for itself because we've never had the subsidy here that London Transport has had. So when people say to me or say to Stephen, the Chief Constable, we need people on every tram, you know, we need, you know, what we'd have to charge you for your tickets if we tried to do that would just be, you know, they're expensive, we do our best, don't we, Bob? But they're probably higher than I would like them to be in an ideal world. If I could get them lower, I would do. But if we were to follow through and have, you know, a staff on every train enforcing everything, the ticket prices would be way beyond what we would consider acceptable. So it's tough. You know, we're running a transport. I think TFGM over the years have done a fantastic job to build Metrolink into what it is without the subsidy. But you know, we're obviously stretched all the while, and you know that. You know, we run a great system, but without the help that we should be getting, in my view.
Gentleman in the corner, just before we switch topics.
Oh, stand up. Tommy. Yeah, when you're going on about flu and COVID, you've got long COVID, and that is affecting people 6 months to a year on, so you can't compare the two. With COVID, long COVID, it affects your kidneys, it affects your heart, you get brain fog, so you just can't compare the two. And one of my kids is a respiratory consultant, and when you've got 64 people on an intensive care unit at the height of COVID, and you expect to lose a third of them. That's the seriousness of this disease, and that's why we should be wearing masks on trams and etc. etc. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Alan. I mean, I think that again is what I would say part of the answer, in that we don't still know everything about this condition, do we? And long COVID is, I don't know again if people know people in your family circle or your friends who've had long COVID, but it seems to be becoming increasing to me. And even people who've had it recently are taking 3 weeks to properly shake it off, 4 weeks and some. So there's kind of, even if it's not the full long COVID, it's still debilitating people for quite a period of time. So I think it's just getting through this period, isn't it? And getting through this winter, and then hopefully come next year, the things can be properly lifted. And, you know, I think we all want to get to that point.
No question that the pandemic has been the biggest thing that we've all been facing, yourself included in your role. But I'd say probably that the next biggest thing maybe that you've had to face over this second term in office would be the situation at Greater Manchester Police. So on that note, I want to bring in Brendan Evans, if you can make yourself known to us. He's not here. His question's a simple one. Andy, what progress have you made dealing with the problems in GMP?
I think we've made huge progress from where we were this time last year. Great. Just to roll it back a tiny bit, if I can, before I come to the evidence of that progress. We had a period of cuts to Greater Manchester Police between 2010 and 2017, and so it was not a good period. I knew that as a local MP. You know, the service was retrenching. But then, obviously, when I came in as mayor and the deputy mayor came in, the force was hit by the arena and everything, the shock of that and everything that did in terms of... Now, I don't want to sound like we're making excuses, but I do think that the force has had to contend with a huge amount over the last decade. However, and I've been open about this and I'll say it again, I always had concerns, nearly from all the time I was an MP, about the internal culture within GMP. Sometimes it felt negative and sort of pushing the public away. You know, people reporting things that going into a black hole, and I would repeatedly raise that as the MP for Lee. Now, I came in wanting to do something about that, but then some of the events that I've just mentioned hit GMP, and we weren't able to, you know, to make that change that was needed to the culture. And then, you know, there's the whole issue with the computer system, which I'm not making again excuses, but was signed off before my time, and then introduced, and you know, that I think has been a massive sort of change that they've had to deal with. But I think the truth of the matter is, while some of this was beyond their control, other parts of it they didn't handle right. So when the cuts hit, they kind of retrenched everything to the centre, and they started to cut support in the districts. For instance, the chief superintendents that were in every district were removed, and then we had a situation where one was in charge of 3 districts, I think. Bev. So that was a kind of their way of dealing with the cuts, you know, pull things back to the centre. And personally, I think that was the wrong approach. They also introduced this idea of the omnicompetent officer, and the chief constable may want to pick up on some of this in a minute, Michael. But this was an idea that every frontline officer goes to everything, you know, from a very low-level antisocial behaviour issue to a very serious sexual assault, and that is kind of wishful thinking, I would say, that, you know, you get that one individual can provide that breadth of response to all of those incidents. So I think the kind of combination of all of those things led to the report from the HMIC last year. And obviously my job is not to run Greater Manchester Police, but it's to challenge it, and if necessary, use the one big power I have in my locker, which is to change the leadership, which is what I did this time last year, just in December. And I believe, and you can make your own judgments when you hear from him, but I believe we have, without a shadow of a doubt, got the right person in place to lead Greater Manchester Police forward from this moment in time. And the things that the new Chief Constable has said tell me that the focus is going right back into the right place. So, for instance, I don't know if the new Chief Super for Bury is here tonight, Chris, but I think, it is here. So, great that you've come, by the way. So this is your new District Chief Superintendent. And that was an immediate change. So that was recognised to be wrong. One of the first things was to put that resource back into all districts. Chief Constable has also said that, you know, we're not going to do this black hole thing anymore. Every crime will be investigated. Every burglary will get an attendance from an officer. These are the basics that I think people have wanted to see for a long time. So not only we've got the right person, I think we're now seeing the right things happening, and the commitment has been made to double the number of arrests. Now, obviously, it's my job to hold the Chief Constable to account for those things and making sure that those things are delivered. But I don't know about you, but I'm quite old school when it comes to these matters. I like the idea that I've got a Chief Constable in place who's talking about doubling the number of arrests, because I don't think we have had a front foot policing in the way that you all deserve for quite a long period of time. So the change is happening. It's real. But obviously, myself and the Deputy Mayor will be making sure that it comes through, and you experience it as residents of this borough and as residents of Greater Manchester. Because at the end of the day, if you don't, I could sit up here all night and talk about these things endlessly, or the Chief Constable could, and it's just words then, isn't it? It's when you experience the difference, when you ring 101 and you're not left just hanging on, and then putting the phone down because no one's coming to you. When you get an early answer, and yes, right, we'll do, that's when I think you'll say, right, okay, there's change here. And we're not there yet. And we're not going to say we're there yet, Michael, but there are definitely green shoots and a bit more, I would say, coming through. And just so you kind of know it's not all talk, you know, on that doubling the number of arrests, another thing that's been done recently is custody suite in Bolton that was stood down has been reopened by the new chief because of this new commitment to tackle more offenders. So for me, it's what I want. It's why I appointed Stephen Watson as our Chief Constable. I'm absolutely delighted with the start he's made. I can see the culture change starting to come through the ranks. I think there's many, many thousands of absolutely brilliant people working in Greater Manchester Police at every level. And they have our full support, don't they, Bev? And we recognise what they do, we see what they do. But we think they've been held back by the organisations they've worked, the organisation and the culture of it that they've worked for. And if we can clear that culture up and free came into the police force to do, then GMP can really push on and do it quite quickly from here.
I might bring the Chief in just a moment, but before I do, you mentioned the oversight. It's politicians. It's you. It's the Deputy Mayor. It's the Police and Crime Panel. It's the councillors. It's the MPs. There's no shortage of people. And as much as we can sit here and say, well, we knew for years things weren't as they should be, people are justifiably going to look at that and say, okay, well, what took you so long?
Well, it's a fair question. So let me explain what I did do. Within days of taking office, and I mean within days, the Deputy Mayor and I commissioned a major independent inquiry into the handling of child sexual exploitation in Greater Manchester. And that inquiry is ongoing, but it has already done its first major report into child sexual exploitation in Manchester. That was 2020. And it revealed terrible failings on the part of the force. If you remember, this was the allegation that Maggie Oliver made, that Operation Augusta, as it was called, was literally just cancelled overnight back in 2005, and those victims were just left. And she made that allegation. I heard her make it on the radio. I set up the inquiry on the back of that, and it was borne out by what the report uncovered. And now that process of inquiry is looking at Oldham, it's going to then go on to Rochdale, and this is difficult stuff. But this is holding to account, and that holding to account process then gives you the evidence on which you can act. I'll give you a couple of other examples. There was the Kerslake report that I commissioned into the response at the arena, and that I think revealed a picture that's now being kind of given in much greater detail by the inquiry. That will require a response from us when it comes out. A third one would be the Deputy Mayor's report into the IOPS system, which again was an independent report that we commissioned. So what we can't act without evidence, but we have built evidence about what was wrong in Greater Manchester Police, and that's why when the HMIC report came out last year, I took that firm decision to change the leadership. So, that's all I can say. We have carried out some pretty rigorous oversight and scrutiny of Greater Manchester Police. It kind of revealed a culture that, in the end, I felt was way too defensive and sometimes obstructive. Because without going into all the details tonight, we are clear that at times the full picture was not given to us. And that is wrong, basically. And, that also featured in our thinking around, the need for change. But I think we've got change coming through.
I'm interested to know what people in the room here and with us virtually would like to see from our police force going forward. So have a think about that. Christmas isn't too far away, so it's not too early to get things pinned on the wish list. But first, Chief Constable, you've got a job on your hands, and the two times that I've spoken to you about this previously, you've told me that if we're not in a materially different position in 2 years, you'll be off. Tell me more.
Might I just stand? I'm conscious of people behind me. I'll be quite brief in my comments, but thank you very much for your question. Yes, I will be off, but it's not going to happen, because let me just start with the latter point that the Mayor's just made. I'm not here to tell you that we don't have a job of work to do in GMP. I'm not here to tell you that the force hasn't got itself into a bit of a pickle. But what I am here to tell you is that the many, many thousands of people who work for GMP are fantastic people, dedicated, courageous, do things that many of us would not do, and they do it every day. And so we've got terrific people. But what you need is you need a really good plan, you need a really good way of delivering the plan, and you need really good empowered leadership. And across those three drivers, which is important to run anything, those commodities have just been insufficiently represented in the GMP of recent years. We've got a plan, we've got a really good way of delivering that plan, and we have, as has already been mentioned, started to put in place at all levels the leadership required to deliver the plan. The point about where am I going if we don't pull it off, frankly, the force is too good to be in the position that it's in. Our people are too good to be in this place. Our people are in this place because the leadership hasn't been up to it. And so if I'm not good enough to pull it off, then I need to make room for somebody who is. This isn't a grand gesture, incidentally. Many of you may or may not, but if you haven't, please look on our website and you will see it. We've set out what tangible improvement looks like. We've set out some basic promises to the public. And what are we talking about? The Mayor's just rattled off a few of them. Really basic common sense stuff. We'll pick up the phone more quickly. We'll record all crime. We'll investigate all crime. We'll pursue all lines of inquiry. There's no such thing as minor crime. There's crime that affects people in different ways, and you have to make a judgment on the experience of the victim. We will double the number of arrests, not because that in itself is a great figure, but because we've been under-recording, under-investigating, which means we've been under-arresting, which means lots and lots of criminals have not been held to account. And when you don't do that, you seed future crime and you let down victims. So we will be arresting more people, we will be getting better outcomes before the court, we will be leaving victims in a better place, we will be seizing more assets from criminals. Yesterday, Operation Avro, Salford, some of you may have seen it. 18 vehicles seized off the road, 104 motorists prosecuted for various offences, 18 people arrested, all before breakfast. And one of whom was arrested in possession of property which had come from a burglary which he had committed 6 hours earlier. Our people are fantastic. We've just got to let them loose. We've got to put them in the 6-yard box. So that's what we're going to do. And I am going to be held accountable because that's my job. But am I confident that GMP can turn itself around? Bet your bottom dollar. We've got fantastic people, and we are going to do some real damage to bad people, and we're going to look after victims better, and we're going to protect our communities who just want to go about their business, not being molested by people.
We're getting questions coming in through, Facebook and Twitter, and please do keep them coming in with the hashtag AskAndyGM. Kenny Whitaker on this topic asks, it's particularly relevant when we think about the situation that's played out around the corner in Rochdale. When are we going to deport foreign nationals who are convicted members of grooming gangs?
Well, that is a question for the Home Secretary, and it's a question that myself and the Deputy Mayor and the local MP, Tony Lloyd, have put to the Home Secretary directly. That is, we don't have, I want lots of powers out of Westminster, but I do not have powers to deport people. That is a Home Office function. And I believe the victims have been let down in that regard, and it's why I've spoken out on the issue, and it's why we call again on the Home Secretary and the Home Office to use their powers of deportation to protect those victims in Rochdale.
Do we have a gentleman at the back? Let's get the microphone over to you and keep this going. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. I'm a Labour councillor, a new councillor in Unsworth, as you know. And one of the things that's raised with me is about car theft. So especially at this time of year, residents in Unsworth have reported to me about car theft, so people breaking in to get the keys. You know, how can you assure those residents that, you know, if that does happen, there will be a police officer there to listen to them, to deal with it, and that, you know, more holistically, we are going to invest in tackling the causes of crime as well. I think that's particularly important. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Nathan. I mean, I think that's a classic example of the kind of crime sometimes that's just, oh, well, here's the insurance number. But you've just heard from the Chief Constable that that's not the approach that will be taken anymore. And to be honest with you, what I've been really heartened by is the general approach to motoring, because I think it often can be the route to other forms of criminality. Driving without insurance, for instance, is something, you know, I think we've clearly picked up some of this in Salford yesterday, you know, untaxed vehicles. Sometimes that can be the kind of a sign of other criminality, because the people who are driving around like that won't be the only thing that they're not doing right. So, you know, I think you are absolutely right, Nathan, to say if you get your focus on that level of the basics, it can actually create the right climate, if you like, to tackling all crime and sending a really strong message into the system, which has clearly been done in Salford yesterday. And I think the intention, Stephen, is to do that in different boroughs, isn't it? To have that kind of high impact approach across the system. Of course, more broadly, you're right, Nathan, you need to invest in preventative stuff. You know, we had the Chancellor yesterday talking about youth centres and youth services. Well, good, but 10 years too late. You know, we should have been maintaining that investment over all of those years. And it's why I say you can't differentiate this issue with some of the cuts that we experienced in that period, where prevention largely disappeared, I think, from a youth services point of view. But, you know, this is what I think we mean about getting focus back on the basic things that people want to see tackled. And car crime is a really good example of it, because it blights a lot of communities particularly, doesn't it, where people are just looking out for those certain type of vehicles, and and certain areas are absolutely battered by it. And we need to, I'm sure the Chief Constable's heard what you've said. We know where those areas, the force know where those areas are, and we want a more proactive approach to dealing with it, because it's likely that there are gangs who are operating around GM going to those parts of Bury or to Trafford or wherever it might be, it's unlikely that it's all going to be local criminals doing all of that car crime. I think it will be gangs, won't it? Not all of it, but a large chunk of it will be.
We've got two gentlemen here with questions, one here, one here. You're going to be closest to the microphone, I think, so you'll be first.
Hi, Andy. Sham Raja, we've spoken before.
Yeah.
My question, I've already spoken with the Chief Constable regarding North Manchester in Cheetham and Cromsall, where crime is very high. And there's been more than 18, 20 turf shootings in the last 2 years. We did have a police station there previously, but it's been closed down for a number of years. I know there's been a shortage of police, and 3 years ago there has been an increase in the police, 400 plus, and the last year, and even today announced as well. And burglary is very high. Asian women being robbed. People are frightened to open their businesses. So something needs to be done regarding North Manchester. Could you please look into that? And the Chief Constable promised me, yes, he will, and they have taken guns off the street, but we need to do more.
Yeah. No, I think that's an area that people do raise concerns about on an ongoing basis, the Cheetham Hill area particularly. And I'm aware of some of the incidents that you've described, some very serious. We have been investing in extra police officers since 2017. So, you know, you asked me before, Michael, about what have I done? Well, I say what have I done? You did it, because obviously we asked you all to pay more through your council tax for more policing, but that was delivered. So we've seen an increase. You know, we had falling numbers of police officers between 2010 and 2017, but that was the bottom point, and they've been climbing ever since. And I think the intention would be to take that further forward this year. And obviously that's difficult because it's obviously asking for more money, but you know, we think it's a priority that most of you will, if not all of you, will support. So there are more police officers now, which does mean we can up the level of service, particularly in the areas where it's most needed. But I think, you know, given what you've heard about Salford yesterday, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I'm sure the Chief Constable will say that all areas, you know, can expect to see similar, and particularly those areas where crime is highest, and particularly more serious forms of crime.
Gentleman at the front, because you've been waiting, then we'll come to the lady at the back. And here's the microphone.
Thanks. Just to comment on the issues around policing and crime, Andy, I think the changes that have been made, and welcome the change from the Chief Constable around bringing the local Chief Superintendents back into place. That's certainly something that we were missing in Bury. It's great to have Chris with us tonight, who's doing a fantastic job, and myself and the leader have met with Chris to discuss our needs and our priorities in the borough, and that's clearly a gap that we had, and I'm sure other localities had as well. In terms of issues that are raised with us local councillors and the perception, so, you know, the issues around HMI and some of the long-standing pressing cultural issues is one thing, and let's be honest, you know, the ordinary person on the street perhaps doesn't relate with that as much as we may do in this room. You know, they want to see results, they want to see visibility, they want to see outcomes, and I guess, you know, it's reassuring some of the messages that are coming out of GMP, but from Joe Blogg's point of view, the proof will be in the pudding. Yeah. So it'd be really good to see, you know, we've got the commitment to neighbourhood policing. It'd be really good to see the visibility right across each of our wards, and building on the visibility, some outcomes to, you know, whether it's ASB that's recorded, whether it's drugs issues that are reported, if residents can start to see outcomes to some of the issues, burglaries has already been mentioned, and also I think the connections with the local place. So, you know, 6-7 years ago, neighbourhood policing teams would be in local schools, for example. You know, we've lost some of those simple connections, which actually go a long way. So if we can start to kind of from the grassroots focus, build that trust and confidence back up, as I'm sure we will. And I think we also need to recognise it's not an easy time to be a police officer. All the issues with GMP is one thing, but some of the national issues, you know, the fallout from the Sarah Everard, and the perception, the culture that we have around policing, I think it's something that we all should be very conscious about. So, you know, I just want to thank GMP and everybody working in Bury and beyond for the work that they're doing. And I think sometimes that gets lost in terms of the pressure and the demand that's on them as well. But, you know, from my constituents' point of view, from an ordinary person point of view, it's great to have that common focus back again on what we're doing. And a final point will be on the diversity of the workforce. I think that's one of the strong points to come out the last 5 or 6 years within GMP. I hope we can commit to that and even build on it further.
No, thanks, Tamar. I mean, that point you make about it's not an easy time to be a police officer, I think that's true of all emergency services. I don't know if everybody watches the ambulance programme, but that comes through when you watch that, isn't it? You know, the higher levels of people in serious crisis, mental health crisis, it's all there, isn't it? And, you know, it makes the job, I think, a lot harder. It's already a hard job, but it's got harder in the last period. So we all have to bear that in mind. But just to answer your point about that connection between the GMP and residents at a very, very local level, Bev and I took the decision early this year to move to a named officer and PCSO for every ward. So in effect, every resident can go on the system of GMP and you can find those names. The Chief Constable's decided to expand that, so I think you see the full policing team there now. And that is what we're trying to do to get that bond back, you know, that accountability back into the system, so that you know Chris and his team, and you know you have a means of contacting the team. If it's not to report a crime, just to say, I'm watching this, I'm seeing this is worrying me. And that's what we're trying to get back to here. You know, there were a couple of standout reasons why Bev and I wanted to appoint, or we were clear that Stephen was the right person for us. One was the absolute determination to rebuild neighbourhood policing and get the resources back in at the ground level. In South Yorkshire, that's exactly what you did. And you know, that was massively persuasive for us. But there was a second one, which was, that's a force I know quite well because of my work on Hillsborough. And actually that force was not, well, you could say it was possibly in a worse position than Greater Manchester Police if you go back to 2016 when the Hillsborough inquest had just finished, the second inquest. And that is the point when Stephen went in. And when I looked at the change that he had overseen in South Yorkshire, it was utterly remarkable. They'd gone from requires improvement across the board to good or in some areas outstanding. And one of those areas was culture and ethics. And that to me said something really, really important. I want a police force where the right behaviours are embodied from the very top of the organisation. Because if that happens, you have a chance of the right behaviours cascading all the way down. And I hope you've seen tonight, when you just heard the Chief Constable speak, evidence of that, and you understand why I said what I said at the start, that I feel we've got the right leader for our police force going forward. We'll all have to be the judges of that. You will have to hold me to accountable, and I have to hold him to. So you put the pressure on me, and then I put the pressure on him. That's how it works. But Bev and I will do that. We will strengthen accountability, Michael. We're moving to a new system of police public accountability meetings for elected representatives. So as they have in London, an open session where councillors and MPs can challenge the force and you know, have that done in public, which in truth was something we hadn't done enough of. You asked me about scrutiny, and not enough of that scrutiny was taking place in a public forum. And I've recognised that, and that's why we're moving to the first one next month, actually. But there'll be 2 a year, and there'll be open public sessions. But then there are these sessions that is the public's opportunity to come and directly hold me to account, but also hold GMP to account as well. And it's why it's great that you're here tonight, but also Chris and Chris from GMP are here tonight, and hopefully that sends a good message to all of you.
Emmanuel on Twitter has a great question here, which is, what will happen with the hundreds of thousands of crimes that were lost previously by GMP that didn't make it onto the records, and how will we stop that happening again?
I don't know whether the Deputy Mayor wants to answer this, because Bev, you've done a lot of work on this, haven't you? And
microphone.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really important question, because you know those incidents were not recorded as crimes, but those things had still happened to people. So we immediately set up, the Mayor and I and my team and JMP, a crime support line, so that anybody who thought they were in that group could contact us immediately. They could re-report that incident, and that all those reports were taken on board by Greater Manchester Police, and you know where there was an issue to be investigated, it was re-investigated. So we tried our very best to make sure that those people whose incidents had not been accepted into the system initially not recorded as crimes, got another opportunity to bring that forward, and many, many did, and I'm really pleased about that. So having kind of done that, it's also important then, going forward, to make sure that the police are actually recording all the crimes that there are in the incidents that come forward in the future. And that actually is one of the ways in which we can see visible demonstration of the progress that this Chief Constable is making, because we're seeing now that very much larger numbers of incidents are being recorded as crime. That, for the moment, is putting more pressure on the system, because clearly accepting them as crimes means we've got to investigate them. But we're doing so. We're still in this kind of catch-up period. But it's much, much better than it was before, and we'll carry on making that improvement, because, as Andy has said and the Chief Constable has said, it's our absolute commitment that the public of Greater Manchester have confidence and trust that the police will treat their issues seriously and do everything that's necessary to bring them to fruition, to hold offenders to account. That is what the police are there for, and that's what we're going to make sure they try and do much better than they did. And they're getting there. They're definitely getting there.
We could dig into this all evening, but I am conscious of time, and we do have a few more topics to get through. I just want to change gear slightly with a question of my own while we're dealing with policing, law and order. I want to talk to you about women's safety.
Yep.
It shouldn't have taken something like the death of Sarah Everard or horrendous headlines about drinks spiking over the past few weeks to make one half of the population realise that the other half are literally living in fear.
Yep.
But we have a moment now, we have momentum to maybe change some things. And we know things need to change because reporting of crime against women and girls is lower. Clearly it's a societal thing, though. It's about more than just law and order. In Greater Manchester, what can we do?
I think you put it well there, don't you, about one half living in fear of the other. That's a powerful statement you've made, but I think it's a really, really important one. And I'm going to be honest, I don't know if I'm speaking for all of the male members of this room, but I'm going to put my hands up and say I'm not sure over the years I've thought enough about how behaviour can make people feel, and the need to sort of challenge not just yourself but people who you know, because it was quite appalling, wasn't it, to kind of hear about women sort of going home with a key between their fingers and sort of never always arranging with friends to say, well, I'm going to be and I'll be honest with you, as my daughters have become teenagers and have now started to go out themselves, I've opened my eyes a bit more, and I should have done before, to things that go on that I probably never asked the right questions, I guess, of people I knew. But certainly, I think it's terrible. What can we do? Well, I could go through a detailed gender-based abuse strategy, which Bev has brought through with huge consultation. There's some brilliant things in it. I'm only going to pull out one, and I'm sorry if this is challenging, but I'm going to say it. This thing about saying, well, women should avoid these places and women should cover their drinks in a pub, all of that is the wrong. That's all wrong. That's the wrong place to start about women should do this, that, or the other. That is the wrong starting point. I say this to all of the men in the room. It's on us, this one, isn't it? It's on us. It's on us to recognise that men are, by and large, the cause of this problem, and we're going to have to challenge ourselves and each other to make women feel safer. We hold the key to it, and it's about not accepting things that perhaps we've kind of just let roll in times gone by. What I've said to you, when I've spoken to my daughters more, she told me about being wolf whistle going into college the other day, and how it was on her mind all day, and how many other thousands of young women are going into schools and colleges in Greater Manchester every day, and that's happening to them, and how many are going home and crying themselves to sleep at night, worrying about that kind of thing. I bet it's a lot. I bet it's a high number. But the men, lads and boys of Greater Manchester can do something about that. We've all got mums, we've all got sisters, we've all got daughters. This one's on us. It is, it's on us, and there's no point in hiding from that. It is. We can change how women feel about their sense of personal safety if we're prepared to do something. If anyone knows that they have mates who spike drinks, I don't know what the Chief Constable would say about this. I would say tomorrow you should be confronting them now and you should be saying to them, but more than that, you should be consider reporting it. I mean, that is downright criminal behaviour as far as I understand. Worse, if you know anyone who's going out at night with a syringe in their pocket, I mean, seriously, that is just the most warped behaviour I think I've ever heard. And I just think that it's about calling people out, isn't it? Even if it's a friend or so-called friend, call it out. The point I was coming to about the one thing in the strategy, I've made a commitment to lead a personal campaign which will be aimed at men, lads and boys in Greater Manchester about a different conversation about women and girls' safety and the conversation we need to have with ourselves and each other amongst male members of society about what we can do. It's about education. It's about a new conversation. That's where the issue is. That's where we've got to start, not women do this, that and the other. And that's my belief about these things, Michael. And if some people find that challenging, I'm also going to say, well, I'm sorry, but that's the reality. You know, we are the cause of this problem, and we are going to have to solve it and make our fellow residents feel safer than they currently do.
I want to squeeze one last policing question in, because Phil, in our virtual audience, has been so patient with his hand up.
Actually, mine is a policing question. I'm really sorry. How disappointed was Andy Burnham with Richie Sunak's contribution, budget-wise, to bolstering law and order in Greater Manchester yesterday? Because I didn't notice a lot of it in his budget.
No, it was a noticeable omission, I would say, given how high it is on the public's mind at the moment, Phil. I've checked the figures. I think the Home Office has a protected budget, I think, in the spending review period. So that gives me some hope. We've got Leon from our fire service here at the moment as well. And, you know, we have had a period of change in the fire service as well, but they're coming through that and are getting stronger. So hopefully we can protect the frontline numbers and services of both Greater Manchester Police and Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service. But really quite something not to get a proper mention in the budget, given how high this is on the public's list of priorities right now and the critical issue of women and girls' safety that we were just discussing.
I want to completely change tack now and speak to Claire Kelsey about something that's very important to me, which is ice cream. Not just ice cream, but Claire, do you want to make yourself known? Oh, it's not Claire. You're covering for Claire. Well, I'm sure you'll do more than a good enough job.
So this is obviously from Claire. She says, I run Ginger's Comfort Emporium, which is an artisan ice cream company here in Greater Manchester, and she's run it for the past 11 years. We make handmade ice cream and sell from our two beautiful hand-painted and decorated retro ice cream vans. One is 1990 and the other is 2000. From what I can gather, under the incoming Clean Air Zone regulations, I face either paying upwards of £10,000 a year or retiring the vans. Both would put me out of business. The vans are also too old for modifications of the engines. I think basically the question is, what support is there for really specialised businesses such as these to support through this new and positive Clean Air Act that's coming in soon?
Yeah. So this is challenging. There's no getting away from this, Michael. So the Clean Air Zone is coming in next year. It won't affect vans straight away, is the answer to Claire. We've given vans more time, recognising some of the issues that changing vehicles will present to small businesses like Claire's. So it will only impact on HGVs and buses to begin with in 2022, although that will present issues for companies affected there. The thing I need to say is, you know, it's often said it's my Clean Air Zone. This has been imposed on Eamon, the leader of Bury, but the other 9 leaders as well, as a legal instruction from the government. The government lost a big court case on this issue. So we've had to introduce a Clean Air Zone. However, not just going to blame them completely, because it's also the right thing to do. You know, I speak as a former health secretary. I think we look back at that debate about smoking in public places. I would say, now, why did we take so long? You know, and we could see that pollution in the air. This pollution is just as damaging, but because we can't see it, we're kind of saying, you know, we're not going to do anything about it. Well, we should do something about it, because it's often the poorest kids in the poorest communities that breathe in the most polluted air, and it causes a lot of damage. So the long answer is we have won support from the government, and Claire will be able to see soon the details of what support might be available to her. Now, retrofitting the ice cream van, sounds like it might not be an option because of the age of them, but there will be loan finance or grants available to her to replace the vehicle. Now, I think what we are going to have to do, though, is be particularly conscious of businesses that operate in a very specific way with a specific vehicle. And it's why I've asked our growth company to set up a small business support service, so that as well as looking at the van situation, we get a wider look at what the business is doing and see how we can help them make the transition. The answer as well, of course, is, though, if we can help businesses move to newer vehicles and cleaner vehicles, they're often much cheaper to run. So there are savings to the business if you can get them over the hump of buying the new vehicle. All I can say, and you take this message back to her, we will give her an individual business support service to look at how we can best manage this in a way that doesn't threaten the business, doesn't threaten people's jobs. It's going to be challenging, don't get me wrong, but we're doing our absolute best to help every single business through this.
Where does this leave Hackney cab drivers? I speak to Hackney cab drivers. You get in the taxi, you speak to them. The ones in Manchester are worried that they've only got one product on the market, basically, they can upgrade to. And because of the nature of electric cars these days, they don't know whether 5, 10 years behind the line, they'll have nothing with any intrinsic value, any resale, and then they've just flushed all that money away.
Yeah, well, they are a real challenge, but there are more options for Hackneys. Bob, correct me if I've got this wrong, but I think the retrofitting is an option for Hackneys, isn't it? So there will be a grant for people who don't understand that. It's like, you can just modify an existing vehicle to make it compliant with what they call Euro 6 standards. So there are more options for taxis, and there is generous support on the table for Hackneys as well. But again, it's going to be challenging. I'm not going to say it isn't. But we've secured 120 million from the government. The HGV support scheme will open towards the end of next month. So we're getting that scheme up and running, and people will be able to start applying for that money. The other schemes will open in January, I think, next year. Am I right? Yeah. And then, the likes of Claire and others will be able to see what they can get. But what we're going to give them is a bespoke individual support service, so that we get experts looking at all elements of the business to see how we can help them.
Is the money enough?
Probably not. So I'm actually looking at all things that I can do, particularly to help small businesses. So, for instance, if bigger businesses are getting rid of some of their old vans, I'm talking about Royal Mail or UPS or something like that, will they recycle some compliant vans within the system that we could potentially look at buying and then help support them for small businesses? Can I do more to put more loan finance into the system? If it's not enough, how can we expand the loan facilities? So just believe me when I say we're going to do everything. I don't want a single job to be lost. I don't want a single business to go to the wall as a result of Greater Manchester cleaning up its air. But having said that, think about the benefit we'll have when we've got to that position, when there is, a much cleaner environment across our 10 districts. It'll be a good place to get to if we can get there without losing anybody along the way.
We've got a question from the lady at the back. Let's bring you in.
Andy, you and Paul quite happy to take photo ops with gladiators. We're standing by your side. Don't be afraid if you're in a dangerous building. You weren't by the side of the residents of Old School Court in Blakely on Monday when they got the shock of their lives to find the fire brigade knocking on the door with closure orders telling them they're going to be homeless on Monday. The first that the homeless team knew, in what Manchester City Council are now privately admitting is a communication break. Fearful residents started phoning them. They've got a plan now. The genius plan is to dump an entire block of residents in homeless bed and breakfasts. And tapping onto the previous question, you know what happens to young people in those places. The problem is, one of those tenants is one of my kids. So you tell the people that balls this up in Manchester City Council to spend a tiny bit of the homeless reduction, of the homeless prevention grant they just got on paying the night watchman for as long as it takes for those people to find somewhere safe to move to, because I can't rehouse somebody in 7 days.
Well, I don't know the specific case. I'll have to look into it now that you've raised it. It sounds a bad situation, and sorry for what's happened. Is it your son or your daughter, did you say? Your son? Right. On cladding, I mean, Paul Dennett and I, the City Mayor of Salford, we have always stood by those affected. And in fact, it was down to a national lobby of Parliament that we organised that created the first £5 billion fund that the Chancellor was trumpeting yesterday. I don't think they would have done it without the pressure we put on them. The fire service have tried to, they've done a good job with the high-rise task force. They've really tried to support residents all the way through. But when they find buildings with defects, they can't just say, oh, well, we didn't see that. They have to ask for waking watches or for other safety measures to be put in. I mean, look at that building, the Cube in Bolton. That wasn't even above 18 metres, and look how that one burned down. And that had been investigated by the fire service at our request. So I'll look at the specific case, but safety can't be compromised, can it? You know, particularly when you see what's happened at Grenfell. Okay, well, that sounds sensible. I'd have to have a proper look at the case, and I understand the point you're making.
While we're on this subject, I want to bring in one of our virtual guests who's actually got a question lined up on it. Lucy Seckers.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, hi Lucy.
Hi. Hi Andy, hi Liam from the fire service, and hi Michael as well. I think, Michael, when you said that the policing was the second biggest issue in Manchester after the pandemic, I think cladding and the fire safety issues have to be really high up there as well, seeing it's the second biggest city affected outside of London. So my question is this. I live in a flat in a 1900s converted office building city centre that has fire safety issues, and last year our insurance premium was increased from 96,000 for the building to over 350,000 overnight, and it's due to rise again. So can you please talk to the insurance companies and ask them why, if the buildings are deemed safe enough for us to live in with waking watches and working and new modern fire alarms and safety equipment, why is it right, fair and necessary for them to inflate the premiums to the degree they are? And the managing agent is struggling to find insurance companies that will actually cover the insurance. You know, it's a nightmare for the managing agent, it's a nightmare for the residents. My flat is valueless, but the insurance premiums are astronomical.
I should say Lucy's development is far from the only one in Manchester and Salford affected by this as well.
Yeah. Well, I will raise it with the insurance companies, Lucy. I mean, I don't see why you should be a penny out of pocket, because none of this is your fault. None of this is the fault of any of the residents. I think there's a moral obligation on the government to rectify all of this. And if they need to recover a lot of it from the property industry or a contribution from them, then that's what they should do. None of it should be falling on you or the residents. I saw the former community secretary today quoted as saying that he had tried to press the case of people affected by cladding, but the Treasury just weren't having any of it. I mean, that was his quote today. You know, what does that say about the way this government is going about this? They're basically saying that people can live in misery and limbo, fear of their lives on complete hold, because we're just not going to do anything about it. It was a failure of government regulation, under all governments, by the way. It's not a party political point. They presided over a system that has led to all of these unsafe buildings. The one group of people who shouldn't be paying is the residents, and that should be true of their insurance premiums as well. So, Lucy, I will raise it with the insurance industry for you.
Yeah,
I'll raise it
please.
with the ABI for you and see if we can get some answers for you.
Because they don't want to insure the building, and I've been asked for the name of the insurance company, and the managing agent's email says that actually it's no one single insurer will insure it. But if it's safe enough to live in,
yeah,
you know, surely it's safe enough to insure.
You would think so, wouldn't you? But I will have a proper look at it for you, Lucy. Thank you.
This situation, you know, that old saying of safe as houses has been disproven.
I think this is just a bigger point, I would say, about where we've been going as society in the last 20, 30 years. And again, it's under all governments, so I'm not saying it's just one. But this idea that you can deregulate everything and the market somehow miraculously fixes things, and makes things safer and better. Well, it's proven to be not true. You know, the market has not delivered us bus services that people can afford, that go to every community. That's what deregulation has done there. And if you look at buildings, homes and building safety, you're left to a situation where people are being made homeless at short notice or paying insurance premiums that have gone through the roof. You know, and it's this whole thing about deregulation and just, oh, cut it all. Red tape is what it has always been called. Well, it's there for a reason. It leads to a situation where, you know, you kind of just free up, you send your utilities off to private entities who don't then invest in the infrastructure, and you're pumping raw sewage out into the waters of Britain. I mean, this is where all this has got us, and I don't think it's a great place, to be honest. And I do think we need a major rethink of putting the public interest first. And that's clearly what we're doing with buses. We're putting them under public control. And we think as a result of that, you will all get a much better, much more affordable service as a result of that. But I think it is time to call time on this sort of mantra that the market fixes everything. It doesn't fix everything. It's left many people in this city region without a home that they can afford, and buses that they can't afford. And it's time to sort of draw a line under it, I think.
I mean, at that point, you look out at the skyline of Manchester and Salford, the core, and it's all cranes, it's things going up. We look at that and we're meant to think, great prosperity. But actually, the rules of the game that allowed this to happen, that allowed Grenfell to happen, they still haven't changed fundamentally. Can we actually put all our eggs in that basket, that that's going to be the investment that, you know, takes our city to the next level?
I think they are better and safer. I don't know if Leon has a view about this, but I think they are not buildings with cladding on by and large. And the inquiry is still ongoing, isn't it, about the Grenfell inquiry, and that presumably will bring through more recommendations. But no, I say it's a process of change. I don't think we're there where we need to be. Some of those big buildings you see in the city, loans are being paid back to us that are then being recycled into more affordable housing. And we have a plan being developed for 30,000 homes for social rent or council homes, zero carbon, and we're going to bring that forward soon. We need to get back in the business of building council housing and social housing again, and Manchester City Council have just made a major announcement to that effect.
Well, actually, on that note, Julie Ives, are you here? Yeah. Julie, would you like to get involved? Let's bring you the microphone.
Well, I'm glad to hear you said that, because my question is, are you aiming to provide affordable social housing? All I observe around the city and districts are huge apartment blocks, which appear to be built by foreign investors, hoping to make some opportunity money. Very little affordable housing seems to be built anywhere, and that includes Bury. I mean, I'm seeing properties built. I live in North Bury, 4, 5 bedroom detached houses, big properties. And there's nothing for people who can't afford those.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, my kids are older, they've got properties of their own, they're fortunate, with a little help from me sometimes. But when it comes down to it, I kind of think we should have some terraced houses, small semi-detached houses.
Yeah,
why is that not happening more?
Well,
and I know you say about council properties. I've worked for the council. I know they've been cut back, and it's just a thing that doesn't happen, and it's all like housing associations and so on. But
yeah.
The rents, people are buying properties and then putting them on the rental market. I know my daughter's done that. We don't have a discussion about it because I don't necessarily agree with it. But how do people afford to get onto the property ladder anymore?
Well, they don't, do they? Anyone under 30 will struggle, or even over that age. And I think it's, if you go back, it was the way the whole lot was sold off, and councils were not allowed to use the proceeds to build new homes. Many of those homes migrated into the private rented sector. It's a figure I never tire of saying because it's outrageous. 40% or so of those homes that were council homes, and many of them in the private rented sector, are not up to the decent home standard. So those landlords are often absent landlords. They don't live in those communities. They rake in that money. They don't put a penny of it back into the upkeep of those properties. And they're probably unsafe from a fire point of view, from a health point of view. And they're dragging the whole neighbourhood down. So,
isn't the council, the planning organisations within the different local authorities in Manchester looking at that?
Well, they do.
Say, no, you shouldn't be building this. You know, you go into Manchester, Victoria, there are 5 multi-storey blocks being built. Who are they for? They're not for families.
I think, well, some of it is more affordable than you might think. I mean, if you look at Manchester Life, which is the big Ancoats developments, a lot of those apartments are, you know, people who are key workers who are living in those places. So it's not the case that this is all way out of anyone's league. I mean, I was living in the city centre over the summer because my kind of house was being rewired, and it was a mix of people living in the place that we were in. I wouldn't say it was high-end, you know, it wasn't. It was fairly normal, and there were a lot of different people in different professions. So I don't think it is the case that they're all complete luxury apartments. Some of them are, you know, reasonably affordable, but not to everybody, but to people on, let's say, you know, middling sort of salaries. But you're right, we have to do more. So we have a plan to build 30,000 zero-carbon homes for social rent, and we're bringing that forward. I think the thing that will make the biggest difference in the short term is tougher regulation of the private rented sector. That, I think, could make a bigger change more quickly. And I'd like to see that through Parliament regulating the private rented sector, or we are going to bring through what we call a good landlord charter, so that we start to regulate them on rents, rent increases. You have a councillor here, Tamor, who actually stood up to a major landlord in Bury, the Red Vales estate, who tried to hike people's rents right up through the roof. I don't know, you may want to say it, Tamor, but it was ridiculous, wasn't it? They were trying to impose a sort of 10% rent rise, or even more, wasn't it? 60%. They just overnight, you know, and he led a fantastic campaign in support of those residents with other local councillors, and it got stopped. And but this market is unregulated, and it allows the landlords basically carte blanche to do pretty much what they want. And back on the homelessness point, the biggest cause of homelessness in Greater Manchester is private landlords using what are called no-fault evictions just to get people out of properties, often when there's no cause, and that is a big part of the problem.
5-minute warning now. Could I just, sorry, because we've 5 minutes left, I want to squeeze as many people in as we can. Is that all right?
Yep.
Right, we're going to take these 2 ladies here because they've waited so patiently.
Yep. Thank you. Good evening, Andy. I'm Tina. We met on the Bury Community Support Network last year.
We did. Yep.
We're a group of community food banks that also provide other support across Bury. And my concern has been about Rishi Sunak and the cutback in the universal credit, and also about people, the different types of people now that are coming to our food banks that are actually working and not being able to survive through a month. Yep. I'm touching on this because we're talking about social housing as well. Yep. And I live in Ratcliffe. Ratcliffe is an area of landlords, absent landlords from Manchester and further afield that buy properties and put people in and then do not look after their properties or their tenants at all. We've seen it time and time again over the last 18 months, 2 years while we've been dealing with COVID, the number of people that are really, really struggling. What is the answer to all what we're having? We know we're going to be a bad winter. We know that people are going to really suffer this year. It's going to be a choice between eating and heating. Right. Where are we going with that?
Where are we going? I honestly don't know how we ended up in a place where we're not paying people enough to live on, so they have to go to a food bank even though they're working. I mean, how did we end up in that position? And you know, some of I'm trying to be fair always. Some of the noises from the government about wages at the lowest level are encouraging noises, but does it go far enough? No. The thing yesterday with universal credit, you could say, was good for the people that you're talking about, the lowest paid, because they are potentially going to get an uplift as a result of the change. But what today, if you're a disabled person looking at that news, what are you meant to make of it? You know, people who can't work, who are also being hit by higher energy bills, higher food bills, higher fuel bills. What on earth are they meant to do? And I think there's a backward step been taken here, back to the deserving poor and the undeserving. You know, that's what that says to me was what was being done yesterday. If the cost of living is going up, everybody who needs that support should be getting that uplift to meet and offset those costs. So I'm very worried actually by what I heard yesterday. I think it's divisive. I think it's unfair, and I'm as worried as you are, but thank God we have networks like yours. It was brilliant actually spending that bit of time with you that afternoon. And I could see Eamon nodding. You're a fantastic resource for this borough. And I think the more that the organisations are networking and working in partnership, then you become a bit of a safety net, don't you, for everybody. And that was clear to me from talking to you all that afternoon. So you're going to have your work cut out, I'm afraid. We'll support you in whatever way we can, but it's going to be tough.
I'm right at the back here.
Hello, everybody. My name is Thelma Binns, and I'm chair of the Bury Rural Inequalities Forum. I know you, Andy, because you've helped me in the past. Some parts of GM are still without quality high-speed broadband. Andy, are you going to champion this as a cause? You know, for instance, the village of Affetside is completely without sustainable open reach broadband, and also parts of Holcombe. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm going to make an offer, actually. If you'd like to come, Thelma, to our Digital Inclusion Action Network, where we have all of the telecoms providers, you can come and make the case for those communities. Right, that's the deal. You can come and do that. Because I think, you know, I know it's tough at the moment in terms of the other pressures on people, but digital access is becoming a human right, I think, if we're honest, because of the way services are going to be delivered after the pandemic. You know, more education is going to be online, more health provision is going to be online, whether we like it or not, but it is. And therefore, you've got to help everyone have access, haven't you? Otherwise, they will miss out on fundamental services and support. So we do need to challenge them. We are rolling out full fibre in Greater Manchester, so there is definitely an opportunity, but we've got to try and find a way of linking it to the places that, and other places that are left without. So you can come and do that, and I'll make sure you get a platform to put your case for those residents of those wonderful places.
Right, it's a Burnham bonus. We're going to squeeze in a couple more.
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, no problem.
Very quickly, Andrew Bean asks on Twitter, you've been given £1 billion, billion with a B, for infrastructure.
Lot, isn't it?
How are you going to use that to make the city region's train stations accessible?
It is scandalous, isn't it, that in this day and age, disabled people, older people can't use our train stations, but they can't, a lot of them, because they don't have step-free access. So in our plan, a number will be getting funding to change and provide that access. Reddish North is one I know well, Swinton. There's a whole, we've got a programme now. We won't be able to do all of them because the rail industry have neglected these assets, to be honest with you, over the years. But we are getting on with the ones that we can. Hindley's going to be done. I'm trying to think if there's any in the borough that will be done. Not sure there are, actually. It's more Metrolink, because obviously the train stations were converted, weren't they, mainly? Yeah, steam train, yeah. No, it's a very big priority for us. And, you know, all stations should be fully accessible. You know, TFGM, back to TFGM, look at the accessibility standards on Metrolink. They are second to none. You know, it's easy to use, it's street level. Look at the train stations. You know, so many of them are just completely out of bounds for disabled people. I was at Levenshulme with a disability campaigner called Nathaniel. He's brilliant. We did a little film with him. If you use that station, it's a really important station, South Manchester, 40 steps up to the platform. 40. It's unbelievable. But, yeah, so we're on with the programme, Michael, and we'll publish the list of the ones that we're doing, but our aim is to make all stations accessible by 2025.
And the final word goes to you. Let's get you a microphone.
It was just about the Wi-Fi issue and the broadband, because when the pandemic started, I tried to get Wi-Fi for Bury and to join the dots, because there's lots of open Wi-Fi wherever you go, and all it needs is somebody to do that, to actually get those networks joined up, so it's accessible everywhere.
Yeah.
And I can't understand why last year that just didn't happen. I got in touch with 3 months of nearly phoning every day, trying to get people to take this on board.
I think we've got another attender for the Digital Inclusion Network. So I agree, you know, I think we've got a challenge. Yeah. If people opened up their networks a bit, they could provide connectivity for people who currently don't have it. That's definitely true. But I'm making it a bigger priority because obviously the amount of stuff that's going on online now, you know, we have to improve connectivity across the city region. And I'll just say something lastly about transport, Michael, because it is the biggest issue that is on my plate, you know, beyond policing. That's obviously another huge issue. But, you know, we did get £1 billion of infrastructure investment, which is huge. It's going to be money that will go into, you know, new buses, bus stops. It will go into train stations, accessibility improvements we've just discussed. So we have the money to do the infrastructure. And, you know, for that, I say to the Chancellor, we're grateful. However, the combined authority will be meeting here in Bury tomorrow to consider a second bid for services. So this is the funding to support more frequent services, night services, weekend services, and crucially, lower fares. So our ambition is London-level fares for the whole of the city region, £1.55 per bus journey. That is what we are fighting for. The Chancellor... So, well, I can answer that because we put with the buses the way they've been in recent times, the private operators have decided where they go, what they charge, and we've not been able to stop that. Now that we've put the buses under public control, I will be able to decide what they charge, working with colleagues at TFGM and the other leaders. And our aim is a £1.55 flat standard fare for all bus journeys across all of Greater Manchester. And that's what I'm now pitching to the government, and this will go through the combined authority tomorrow. We've been asked to bid. They have asked us to send in a bid for bus services support. I'm the only mayor in the country that has decided to put buses under public control, effectively to replicate what happens in London. And by having them under public control, we can make buses and trams one system, effectively. That's the aim. The trams already run on renewable energy. We want a new bus fleet that also runs on net zero. Imagine that, you know, really modern, integrated public transport system for Greater Manchester. And this is the next piece in the jigsaw. To answer your question, if the government back us, and we hope they will, that will be on the ground, or could be on the ground if everything goes our way, by May 2024. Or that's what I've asked Transport for Greater Manchester to do. Well, it is, but if you live in Wigan or Bolton, it'll be a year earlier than that because we're going there first. But it'll be progressively introduced across all of Greater Manchester in that time. I know it's a long time, but it's a massive chaos that we're trying to bring back to some sort of a structured, ordered system. But it'll be worth the wait. And you know that I think will do more to change life in Greater Manchester than anything else that is within our remit. So that's going through the combined authority tomorrow, Michael. I just wanted people to know about that because it's a big, big change, but we're determined to bring it off for you.
I know there's more we could cover. I'd love to, but we really do have to wrap. Just to finish,
can I ask one question?
We do have to wrap up. I'm so sorry, and you did get to contribute before. We've got to.
I just wanted to bring up something about the Eccles line. That was all.
Oh well, feel free to just feed that in. Go on. Yeah. I love a tram question.
All it really is that the Eccles line is running on a 12-minute frequency, single trams, and it's absolutely rams every day. You know, you're squashed in like a sardine. Why can't they run more doubles on the Eccles line? Why is the Eccles line always, you know, put like this? It's ridiculous. In a pandemic as well.
Here's where I do the politician's trick. Bob? You nearly did.
It is difficult. The Eccles line is packed at times. We only have a certain amount of vehicles we can put out. We've got new ones coming in. Andy's managed to get some funding for that. At the moment, it's demand-led. So we try to put the maximum trams where the maximum patronage is. Eccles is still only on a 12-minute service, partly due to driver availability. We've had a lot with COVID, general sickness and attrition. We haven't been able to train at the same rate as we have previously. The training facilities could only take half the number of drivers as we went through. So it will get better, but you're going to have to bear with us a little bit longer.
We've had one last one, so we'll have one last one. In the very lucky purple jumper.
Andy, it's about this meeting tomorrow and the tranche of money, the second tranche of money you're going to seek from the government. You say it's another $1 billion to support services. Was that right?
It's not quite that level, but
right.
it's, you know,
The question is, I think you've been quoted in the media as saying you need £100 million a year for a London-style equivalent system.
Yep.
So this money that you're looking for now, how do you envisage it being paid if you're successful? Will it be on an annual basis so you can subsidise the services? Will it be a one-off? If it's a one-off, what happens when it runs out? You get my drift, yeah?
I massively get your drift, and it's a really good question. So we were invited to bid to a pot for infrastructure, and we put in a bid for about 1.1 billion, and we got 1.07, so we pretty much got what we asked for. So credit to the government there. But we've also been invited to bid to the services improvement pot, and you are right, our bid will be hopefully signed off tomorrow and will go in, and is of that kind of level for the revenue support to provide more frequent services. So we think we need, when we say, the Chancellor used the phrase, finally I got him to use the phrase in the Commons yesterday, he said we will deliver a London-style public transport system for Greater Manchester. He said that yesterday, which was good, progress, definitely. But what does that mean? Have everybody used the buses in London? Is everybody familiar with them? Not everybody, or most people? So, yeah, 155, and you can use as many buses as you like for the next hour. £4.55 is the maximum you can pay in a given day. Even if you take 25 buses, you cannot pay more than £4.65. That's the cost of one ticket here, or it can be. Also, they have a 10-minute service, so they're almost like tubes. You know what I mean? You don't go there by appointment. Oh, it comes at 10:35. I'll have to be there, and I miss it. And then they have services going through those stops in London. That's what we're bidding for as well. We want them to be electric buses. You know, I know you all want orange and white, but we've got to look to the future, haven't we? We can't always look back. And we're going to go for yellow and black B buses, the B network, but we want them to be standard, so that there's whenever you are at a bus stop, you will know what is going to pull up at the curb. You'll know what colour it's going to be, and you'll know what it'll be like inside. You'll know the level of wheelchair space or buggy space. You'll know that there'll be a visual display of the next stop and an audio announcement of the next stop for people who have got visual or hearing impairments. That's what we want to get to, and that again is what the money will pay for. But it will also then pay for that £1.55 standard fare, and it will link into Metrolink, because what I want to deliver as part of all of this is a daily cap on the system. So as they have in London, let's say £8, £9, £10, whatever it comes in at, that means you can get multiple buses and trams in any given day, and you can take journeys that involve buses and trams, and it all be capped within the same system. That is what the money is going in for. No, we will only...
Who's going to meet the... It's going to be more than what you currently pay for the tended service budget, won't it? When you're taking the commercial risk on the whole network. So what happens when you've franchised all the routes, you've got all the fare revenue in, but there's still a gap between what you need from fares and what you need to run the whole thing, keep the whole thing going.
That's the government subsidy. So the government subsidy, that is an ongoing revenue support that London has had for as long as anyone in this room has been alive. London has had revenue subsidy in the hundreds of millions of pounds. Well, but that's what they've had. And levelling up, to me, means levelling up to London. And I think on your behalf, it's absolutely right for me to go out there and say to the government, we are not going to be treated as second class anymore when it comes to this. We want what they have had for all of these years. And I'm asking for a modest subsidy, actually, for you all in relation to the support for our system. But the way you make this work is, the better you make it, the more people get on, and the passenger numbers go up rather than go cut in half, like has happened since we've had deregulation all those years ago. So you create a kind of virtuous circle where you have an improving bus system that more people start to use, more revenue comes into it because of the greater numbers using it. That is what we're trying to achieve. And I think we can do it. We're halfway there. The government has backed the infrastructure. We now just need them to back the revenue support.
But you'll be beholden to central government subsidy in the long term,
Well,
which could be a risk. Which could be risky for government. Might not be conservative. It might be another government that comes along and says, you know, we can't afford this now. Sorry, Greater Manchester.
I take your point.
And then that'll probably go on council tax bills, for example.
Well, I take your point, but you know we're being offered central government to bid for revenue support. You'd be saying the opposite to me if I said, "Oh, I'll rather not." You know, of course, we're going to bid for that support. I think the assumption is that it's going to be ongoing for many years. And actually, if you think about it, if we had a bus and tram system of the kind I've been describing, with the prices that I've said, that's going to build a stronger economy in Greater Manchester. That is actually going to connect people to jobs and opportunity that they can't reach at the moment. If you're a kid growing up here in Bury, if you get a job at Media City or at the airport, it's not easy, is it, to take up that job? Or if you're in Oldham or Rochdale, further afield. What we're going to do here is connect people to jobs and opportunity. And I think, hopefully, raise prosperity levels across the city region that then can come back into supporting a better public transport system. We have to improve public transport. We are world class in many, many things. I was going to say football, but I was then thinking back to last weekend, and I thought maybe I'll put that one just to one side. But we are world class as a city region in many, many respects. The quality of what we do is getting better all the time. The city, in my view, gets better all the time. Bury, our town of culture, fantastic assets here that increasingly people are recognising. The place is getting better, but on transport, we are certainly not world-class at all. And I think if we change transport in Greater Manchester, we will go up another level as a city region, in my view. And it's why I'm on a real mission to change it, knowing all of the risks that you're rightly raising.
And on that note, we finish. After
All right.
a year and a half of Zoom calls, how was being out?
It was better, wasn't it, being out and about? Thanks, everybody, for coming, by the way. Really grateful for you. And thank you. All right. Yeah.